Namaste, and it's very nice to hear all of your voices chanting Bhaja Govindam. It's a very beautiful text, both in its deep wisdom, but also in its exquisite poetry. It's very great Sanskrit poetry, and this is how Shankara communicates the wisdom of the tradition. So, in our discussion last time, we stopped at verse 25, and we'll continue now from verse 26. 26 and then 27 is the last verse contributed by the disciples of Shankara. Because as I said, the text starts with Shankara's poems, verses, then the disciples contribute, and then the teacher comes at the end, and the last 4 verses and concludes the Bhaja Govindam poem. So, when we stopped last day, we saw at least 2 verses, 24 and 25, in which there was one important theme that was being emphasized in verse 24, Tvai mei cha anya eko Vishnu. That God here in this text, the word Vishnu is used, exists equally, identically in all beings. And so the teacher seems to be cautioning the student here, don't get too anxious, don't be impatient. In order to discover the God who lives within us all, learn to see yourself, or learn to see God in all. Sarvasmin api pashyatmanam. See yourself or the divine in all. This brings you closer to this discovery. And we see a similar idea in verse 25. Shatrau mitre putre bandhau ma kuru yatnam vigraha sandhau bhava samachitta sarvatra. Instead of classifying people, who is a friend, who is an enemy, who I like, who I dislike, cultivate an attitude of bhava samachitta. Learn to see all in the same way, regard all equally. This is the way to discovering God who exists in all. And so in verse 26, another disciple of Shankara, the tradition attributes this verse to Bharati Vamsha, and this is what he has to say. This is one of the verses. There was one that we saw earlier on, because there are different, what we call, different recensions of Bhaja Govindam. And so in some versions of the text, there's slight differences in the verse. So in this verse, we have here, Kamam krodham lobham moham tektva atmanam pashyati bhavaya koham. And some text would be pashyati soham. So this is just a variation in different versions of the text, but I'll comment on it. Kamam krodham lobham moham kamam krodham lobham moham tyaktvatmanam bhavayakoham tyaktvatmanam bhavayakoham Atma jnana vihina mudha Atma jnana vihina mudha Se pachyante narakadipura Se pachyante narakadipura Kamam krodham lobham moham Tyagvatmanam bhavayakoham Atma jnana vihina mudha Se pachyante narakadipura Bhaja Govindam Bhaja Govindam Govindam Bhaja Govindam. So this is a familiar list that is given here. Kamam, Krodham, Lobham, moham, however you translate it, kama, desire, kamam, krodham, anger. Lobha is a more intensified form of desire, sometimes translated greed, and moha is confusion or delusion. So the disciple says that these must be given up. Tyaktva atmanam bhavayakovam. So if we take this translation, bhavayakovam, we have to read the verses suggesting that these qualities of the mind must be given up, tyaktva, and one should inquire into the nature of oneself. Atmanam bhavaya kovam. Ask the question, who am I? What is my nature? Now, in the Upanishads, there is a very important way of speaking about the human problem. And there we have several places. The expression that is used is Hridaya Grantha. Hridaya means the heart, and Grantha means the knot, a granthi, or a knot, a K-N-O-T, the knots of the heart. The Upanishad speaks of the knots of the heart and loosening the knots of the heart. And when the Upanishad speaks of these, the knots of the heart, Hridaya Granthi, generally it gives a list. And the first knot is the knot of avidya. So and avidya begins, the tying of the knot, avidya or ignorance. Avidya, and then the sequence goes, kama. So avidya leads, because it's a false understanding of self, it leads to a deep sense of self-lack, self-inadequacy. And that leads to greed. So avidya, kama, and then greedful actions. Greed leads to greedful actions. And then you have this, this sequence described here. So this is verse 26, I think, is alluding in some ways to the Upanishadic idea of the Hridaya Grantha, the knots of the heart. But interestingly, the student doesn't start with Ajnana as the primary knot, always there in the text. So you will see kamam, krodham, greed and anger, because anger is always related to the frustration of some desire. In Bhagavad Gita also, anger is always related to frustration of not fulfilling or not gaining what one wants. So this link is a very important link. But in the third line, the Ajnana is mentioned there. Atma Jnana Vihina, without the knowledge of oneself, without self-understanding. So we can put avidya back at the front. And one does not really remove or eliminate kamam, krodham without Atma Jnana. Because it is Atma Avidya, it is ignorance of the Atman that leads to all of these. Therefore, the removal, what is required is also Atma Jnana. Atma Jnana Vihina Mudha. This is a rather strong word. The fool, the foolish one who is without a self-understanding, te pachyante naraka nikuda. And that's a metaphor. I mean, in the Hindu tradition, we don't send people to hell. We don't have eternal fires in which people are consumed. When we speak of naraka, we're speaking of suffering here, in this world. Naraka is this world, it is suffering here. So if we lack understanding of ourselves, we lose something. We lose something important about our own nature. We lose understanding of that full being that we are, and there is no overcoming of kamam, krodham, lobham, moha. That's the point of the text, which leads to suffering here. So I think we have to focus on this world, on this life, and interpret words like naraka or hell with reference to our experiences here. There is enough naraka here. We don't have to go beyond this life. to find that I will create enough of these conditions in our present life experiences. But this is the idea in this verse is this is very deep, and we find such teachings repeated again and again in our Hindu tradition. Even when you look at a verse that I often refer you to, which is the concluding section of chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita, Sthita Prajna, Lakshana. That beautiful section there in response to Arjuna's question. Who is this Sthita Prajna? I often remind you how Krishna answers that question. He also starts, Prajahati yada kama. He uses the word kama. When one's heart is free from greed, Prajahati yada kama, Sarvan partha manogana, all greed is gone. Atman yeva, Atmana tushta. So then it comes back. And how does that greed go? Only when one discovers the fullness of one's nature, the fullness of Atman, Atman is Ananda. Then alone greed vanishes. Which is, in the Hindu tradition, one can't eliminate greed by trying to stifle it. Maybe we can control the expression of it in our lives, but to deal with its root cause, to deal with where it begins and what is most fundamental, where it starts, one has to go back to Atma-jnana, wisdom about the self. Or else, one can distort oneself very deeply psychologically if one tries to suppress without properly understanding. And then in verse 27, the last one by the disciple, we have a recommendation about a religious way, sadhana, that we should all engage in, beneficial sadhana. This is a verse from the disciple Sumati. Summarizing, in a sense, all of the different kinds of sadhanas that have been commended before in Bhaja Govindam. So, study, prayer, satsang, service. You look at it. So, we've seen already a recommendation of the Gita in a previous verse. Bhagavad Gita, Kinchita Dita, he had said before. But now it says, Geyam Gita. So, Nama Sahasram. One should chant, Geyam, or sing Bhagavad Gita and Vishnu Sahasranam. These are the two that he chooses to mention. And I would classify that first line as the sadhana of study. After all, it is quite true, we have the tradition of recitation of a text like Vishnu Sahasranam, and there is no doubt that there is good, what we say, good punya that comes from reciting the names of Vishnu. But I would want to say also that I think a text like that, like Vishnu Sahasranam, which is a very beautiful text, it's a particular genre of composition that we have in the Hindu tradition, very special to our tradition. These texts that provide names of God, like Lalita Sahasranam, Vishnu Sahasranam. And because each name is a profound discussion about the nature of God. So each name is to be reflected upon. Each name reveals something about God's nature. So we say Vishnu Sahasranam, Om Vishnave Nama. This is one of the lines of Vishnu Sahasranam. Om Vishnave Nama. And Vishnave means the one who is everywhere, the one who pervades everything. So chanting these texts is also a study. And what we have to avoid, I think, is sometimes too much focus on the mechanical repetition of the text. It's very good also to recite Bhagavad Gita, but much better to study the text. Earlier we see even one verse to be studied carefully. So he begins by commending study, but not only. So if study, let us say, the first line speaks of study. It speaks of the intellectual engagement in religious inquiry. The next line certainly reminds us that we are not only mind, but we are heart. Dhyayam Sripati Rupam Ajasam. So in addition to studying, we should engage in contemplation, dhyana, dhyayam, on the form of God. The heart should also be where the mind is. So even as you study, your heart is also, in the second line, the engagement of the heart is in contemplation, in dhyanam, or if you wish, in prayer. So I think the first two lines we may see the union of mind and heart, of study and prayer, study and contemplation. I mean, study itself can be a form of prayer. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, he commends Jnana Yajna as the highest form of worship, the desire to know, to learn, to understand. And then the third one we had seen before, Satasangatve Nissangatvam. This disciple comes back repeatedly, we've seen in this text, Neyam Sajjana Sange Chittam. So, Neyam, the mind, is to be led. The name is nice metaphor. Lead the mind. Sajjana Sange. So, in the company of the virtuous, of the good, of Sat Purusha. Neyam Sajjana Sange Chittam. Chittam, the mind, to be led and brought always, is also in the company of those who are virtuous. This, I think, this is one of the deep insights of the Hindu tradition. We see again and again in our text that there is nothing more effective for character building or personal transformation than association with virtuous people. The profound example of one human being upon the other is what is continuously commended. For a child, the parent is the Satpurusha. So the effect of the parental example on the child, the effect of the teacher in the school on the child, and at various stages in life, the impact that human beings have upon each other is what is at the heart of this emphasis here on right company, right association, always highly valued as in our tradition as significant for religious growth. This is why we've always, yes, and today I don't want to take away all of the wonderful opportunities we have for access to religious knowledge. We need to use those methods that we have today, whether it's on the internet and the publication of books and all that. We have much greater access to learning about our religious traditions than we ever had before. But I think we'd be losing something also if we forgot, what it is to be with someone, a living person who embodies wisdom, who embodies knowledge. At all levels, I think that's true. So, I mean, personally, for me, just to give you an example, surely, I've been teaching for a very long time now, and I know many institutions have moved on to other ways of teaching, the online class, and these are very good. They work a lot for many people who can't often, register for regular courses, or who can't afford what it might mean to attend a college or four-year college. But I know also that an online instruction is no substitute for a teacher with a group of students in a classroom. I see it all the time. What happens in a classroom when you bring a group of students with a good teacher is always creative, is always unpredictable. It's always something new that comes up from a question of a student or a response of a student or a new thought from a teacher. The classroom with the presence of student and teachers is always an unpredictable learning space, always a creative space, always a place of new insight. And in our tradition, why I think the satsang is emphasized so much is that satsang is an opportunity for dialogue. Learning is always is a dialogical process in our tradition. It's never one way. The student is always asking a question, as it should be, as it should be. The student comes to the teacher, and learning takes place through this in some ways very Socratic process of asking and responding, asking and responding. It's very difficult for that process to take place, in the absence of a living teacher. So we always went to a teacher who knows the tradition, but just as important, who embodied this tradition. Because only with a teacher who embodies this wisdom do you really see what the possibility of learning is. Learning will always be an abstract possibility unless you are in the presence of someone who has made that learning part of what he or she is. Then in the company of such a teacher, you see how learning can be transformative. That it is possible, in fact, to embody this vision and to express it in one's way of being, or else it just remains possible. In the Guru, these two things come together, learning and being. Learning and being. The famous statement in Upanishads, Brahmavid Brahmaiva Bhavati. Brahmavid Brahmaiva Bhavati. The one who knows Brahman becomes Brahman. Knowledge is transformative. Bhava is a word that is used in Sanskrit. Matru Devo Bhava, Pitra Devo Bhava, Acharya Devo Bhava. Bhava means, it's a powerful verb. Is to be, is to embody. So if you take those statements, Matru Devo Bhava, it is not. And the translation is problematic. Very often you look at the translation, it says, may your mother be God. That's wrong. That's wrong translation. Matru Devo Bhava. The sentence is addressed to the student. May you become someone. Well, because when you think of it, who is the verb, where is the verb, who is the verb Bhava addressed to? Not to the mother. It is addressed to the one who is hearing. So Matru Devo Bhava means, may you who are hearing me, may you become one for whom the mother is divine. Pitru Devo Bhava. Not that your father should become divine, but you should become a person who sees. Such a change in meaning. You should become someone who looks upon the Father as divine. You should become someone who looks upon the teacher. Acharya Devo Bhava. Atiti Devo Bhava. You should become someone who looks upon the teacher. So in in that beautiful text, the teacher is calling upon the student. Nothing has to happen to the mom or the dad, but it is we to be transformed. It's our seeing them. How it's a call to change our way of seeing, our way of understanding. So Bhava. Being, becoming the being in Sanskrit. As a teacher also. Brahmapit Brahmaya Bhava. If you know Brahman, you should become. A person with that wisdom is expressing. So Geyam Gita Nama Sahasram, Gyeyam Sripati Rupa Mahasam, Neyam Sajjana Sang Ge Chittam, last one also by Deyam Dina Janaya Chavittam. How we relate to others. We must be compassionate. If you think that there is a vertical, if you conceive of the relationship with the divine as vertical, there's also horizontal. Horizontal is what that vertical wisdom means when you translate it to community, into a way of being. Then it becomes, your life becomes geyam or dana, a continuous process of giving, of generosity, of sharing. Without that, this is not complete. The first 3 lines, okay, so one can chant Gita, one can chant Sahasranam, one can contemplate God, one can sit in satsang. But then how do you relate to others? Are you a generous person? Are you a caring human being? Are you compassionate human being? Is the point of the last. So you can see in this one verse, there's another way in which we speak about a human obligation that you might remember from some other context. It's called Deva Yajna, the worship of God. Rishi Yajna, study of Shastras. Manushya Yajna, the service of other human beings. Manushya Yajna, and then Bhuta Yajna is the service of nature, ecological. But both of these could be collapsed into the last line. The last line says, Deyam Dina Janaya Chavitam, but it doesn't limit itself to human beings. Be generous to those who are in need. Give generously to those who are in need. And it doesn't say that the only form of giving is victim or wealth. Victim can be somebody can need a word of solace, a word of support from you. At that time, that becomes the best thing that you can give someone is a helpful word, a supportive word, a supportive arm. So it doesn't specify the kind of generosity. You have to determine that on the basis of context and the need of the person. It just says, be generous, give. So Deyam Dina Janaya Chavitam. It's very much I've often mentioned that the rest of the teacher gives in Bhajagovindam Upanishad to his students, and he said that one syllable. You might remember me speaking about that sometimes. That the. There's a different group of students, and they all heard something different. And he said the to one group, and he said, what did I say? And they came back and said, you said Dhamma, control. And he said, yes. You are right. Then another group, he said the, and they went and they thought again. And they came back and said, what did I say? They said, you said to us, Guruji, datta, give, share, be generous. And he said, yes, you will. And the third group came and he said, and he also said to them, the, and they went and they thought about it. So they came back and he said, what did I say? And he said, Guruji, you said daya. You said, be compassionate. And he said, yes, you're also right. Because he said, what I want to say is, control yourself. Give and be compassionate. Be caring. Very beautiful section of Real America. And now we come now to the last 4 verses, and Shankara comes and concludes the text. But you will see, he gives a very beautiful summary of all the ideas and teachings we've seen before. So in these last 4 verses, we get he lifts up certain central teachings that we have seen before. And one of the themes of this Bhaja Govindam is always, the finite has its value, it has its purpose, but it's only a means to an end. Don't make finite things the end of your life. See them in their instrumental nature. Sukhataf kriyate rama bhoga paschadanta sharire roga. It says. However you take this opening 2 lines, it can speak to us. It speaks about the abuse of the physical body in the earlier part of one's life, a careless lifestyle without thinking of the consequences it might have for you physically. So, we're excessive in the things that we do, and the paschadanta sharire roga, and it only suffers. The body suffers because our lifestyles are not wise, not informed by what is good for us. And this relates to one of the earlier verses. You can connect the last 4 with particular verses. Nari stana bharana videsham dishtva maga moha vesham etan mam samasadi vikaram manasi chintaya varam param. And he spoke here about the limits of the body, seeing its transient nature, and he returns here to this idea. Gita also made this identical point about those kinds of lifestyles which seem in the beginning to give a lot of satisfaction and pleasure. Vishayendriya samyoga yattada karagri amritopam pariname vishamiva. Those ways of living which give some sort of transitory pleasure, but later on, they come at a very high price. This is in the 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. That seems like nectar at the beginning, but becomes poison, visham, later on is what Shankara is also pointing here to in the first 2 verses. Not that we don't need all of these transient things in life, but we have to see them and always see them in proper perspective. In the last 2 verses of verse 28, he comes back to the idea we saw earlier on in the text, Nalini, the brevity of life, how precious it is, this short human life. Yad yapi loke maranam shara. Even though it's very clear, we will pass, we will leave this, but even so, tadapi namunchati papa charana. And someone expresses his own regret, and yet no one seems to want to change. And to make the kinds of choices and have your own pinches. So the Acharya is expressing his own bewilderment, as it were, even the reality of death as a significant difference in human beings, and how they live their lives, and how they use the precious brief time we have on earth. So this is just a revision of themes that we have seen before, and the same point in verse 29, he also picks up on what we've seen earlier. So you remember, of course, that the very first line of Bhaja Govindam, Mudha Jahi Dhanagam. So he comes back to that point about wealth. He didn't ask that wealth should be given up, but Dhana Agama Krishna, greed for it. So he comes back here and he says, as he's concluding, Artham Ananta. Nice expression. Think of the many ways in which wealth is not wealth. Artham Anartha. It's one kind of wealth, but wealth is not all wealth. There are many more things that are precious and valuable in life that you will give up. You will not want to give up for gaining wealth. Artham Anartha. Think of the many ways in which wealth may not always be what we think it to be. May not always be wealth. Beautiful expression. Artham Anartha. Bhavaya Nitya. Think of all the problems this sometimes causes. Not that we don't need it, again, I'm emphasizing that, but it only goes so far. It only goes so far. Nasti tata sukha lesha satya. It's always interesting, when you see how these insights about the limitations of wealth and the relationship between wealth and happiness, something that goes back from the earliest teachings of the Hindu tradition, is always affirming to see how even contemporary research establishes it. We do know there's a lot of wealth research related to happiness now. And basically the conclusion is, as articulated here in Bhaja Govindam, that human beings do need wealth to enhance life's comfort. So, of course, that poverty is a form of suffering. It does create conditions in which we suffer. We should not minimize that. But I think, if I'm remembering the figures well, in some of the one bit of research, that after 70,000, I think, is that number? 75 or 70? 70, okay, I got that. After 70,000, wealth doesn't add to your sense of well-being or to the fullness of your life. In other words, you met all of your basic needs. It doesn't make you a happier person. It has that's as far as it goes. It has instrumental value, not intrinsic value. So if you look to it beyond that, for your sukha, as Shankar says, sukha, then it's going to be very, very frustrating. So the empirical studies validates it. only goes so far. It doesn't mean that we don't need it. It's not condoning poverty. But he's reminding us of the limits of wealth as far as happiness is concerned, and that's validated in studies. But he takes an opportunity in the last two lines again. Putra dapi dhana bhajam bhiti sarva traisha bhita. Sometimes we see this, obviously that Shankara is making an observation from what he's seen, even in his own time, in the 7th century. That very often when there is this obsession with wealth in families, it creates interpersonal conflict. It leads to anxiety, it leads to fear. It is not, obsession with wealth is for interpersonal relations. In families, if you're very, very miserly and attached to wealth, you see even your children as threats. You're anxious even about, and suspicious even about the child and his or her own intentions and wishes. It's a very basic fact about human nature. He's observing, what happens when there is this unhealthy attitude to that. Putra, one becomes anxious even about one's son. And it's something that to retrieve from this. And then this comes also with some practical advice, sadhana advice also for us. These are to be done carefully, very carefully. These things you should take very seriously. Practice carefully. With great care. What? Pranayama, pratyahara. So he basically, in some ways, he's going to the tradition of yoga. Because as you know, these are important limbs in yoga. Yoga starts with the ethical yama and niyama, and then it goes to pranayama, pratyahara. So, pranayama. Prana is an interesting Sanskrit word. It has a lot of different meanings. At the most basic level, in popular usage, prana is the breath. So, pranayama in certain kinds of yoga practices will be breathing. We have a lot of breathe in, hold the breath, breathe out. The disciplines of breathing. But it is also true that prana is not limited in meaning to the breath. Prana has a very deeper meaning of energy, life energy. We speak of the pancha pranas. When we talk about prana, we speak of the pancha pranas, which would be the energies that govern all physiological activities. Prana, apana, samana, udana, dhyana, the multiplication of pranas. So we can read it very specifically also. Pranayama is the practice, the specific yoga practice, but I think it's not inconsistent in meaning also to see pranayama as the intelligent regulation of all of life's activities. You can see it in that sense also. The intelligent regulation of all of life's activities in harmony with, with Gita's teaching again, where Sri Krishna talks about moderation. Yukta ahara viharasya yukta cheshvasya karmasu. One who is moderating, sleeping and eating and leisure. So pranayama is I like to read it as a lifestyle, intelligent lifestyle of moderation. So you have to be moderate even in moderation. Pratyahara, again, pratyahara is control. It goes with pranayama, regulation, control. Pratyahara, sometimes used specifically for sense control, control of the sense organs and the mind. So, manasa, indriya, control niyama is pratyahara. Gita, again, is a very beautiful example of pratyahara. Yada samharate chayam, sthita prajna flexion. Yada samharate chayam, kurmongani vasarvasha. This is an example of the tortoise, able to has control over its limbs, to draw its limbs up. Indriyani, indriya, tasya prajna pratishtita. So pranayama, pratyahara, nitya, nitya, viveka, vichara. Always jnana, you find some way to introduce the importance of wisdom, nitya, anitya. And to think, as we've seen through, try to think carefully about what has eternal value, nitya, what has transient value. Not without value, but transient, limited value. So nitya, anitya, viveka, vichara. Make sure you don't stop thinking. Discern, practice this process of discernment in determining your values. Try always to keep in mind what is limited value and what has highest value, deepest value. What would you not want to give up? What is significant? What is at the core of your concern? Don't mix the two up. Japya sameta samadhi vibhana. We know the sadhana of japa is value. We commence. Previously we have seen Geyam Gita Nama Sahasram, repeating the names of God. Shankara comes again, he commands this discipline as a way of focusing the mind, keeping the mind directed, its energies, japa. Samadhi vidhanam and samadhi. So japa and samadhi are related. Japa is when there are many kinds of japa, but the most well known is you take a mantra, sacred word, and you repeat it first of all, audibly, but then japa should become mental, becomes inaudible. So, the japa that is done that others can hear, and then the japa that is done in the mind alone. But when through the repeated practice of japa, the mind is quiet, thoughts are quiet and still, then the mind can enter into a deep state of shanti, deep state of abiding peace, which is, there's nothing, I'm not saying anything vocally or I'm not repeating anything, just the mind simply abides. Samadhi. Dhi is also used for mind. Dhi, buddhi, dhi, and sama, stillness, abiding quietly, as a consequence of the practice of japa. So, japa is a form of mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness can be cultivated through the practice of japa. So, Shankara commands these. Please be attentive to this. Please be very careful about practice. So I think we can take from verse the importance of practice, regular practice. As part of one's religious life, there should be sadhana, and these are the forms of sadhana that he comments. In other words, to be religious means to have some regular spiritual techniques, spiritual technologies that one employs as part of one's growth. One has to have sadhana. And these are elements of sadhana that Shankara recommends. And so, the last verse of Bhaja Govindam, not surprisingly, as you've looked at it, is Shankara's blessing to all of us, the verse of benediction, that he wishes all of us who have studied this text, if we will discover God in our hearts. And it's been, before we comment on this verse, I should say, I'm very grateful that we had this opportunity to study this text together. We started last year. And it's always a great blessing of God that all you will start together. We come to the last verse of this beautiful poem. And as I said before, our study of Bhaja Govindam is in a sense only the beginning. You have all of these verses now as part of your own life, as part of your own sadhana. Don't forget the text. If it's only one or two verses each day, you can recite and think about during the day. I mentioned to you at the very beginning, Gandhi's technique through which he memorized the whole of the Gita. And he did it by sticking a verse on the mirror. When he got up and he was brushing his teeth and shaving, he used that to memorize a verse of the Gita. It's a very, very, very astute use of time. So this is only 31 verses. Gita is 700. This is only 31, but a lot of the wisdom of the Gita is also present in Bhaja Govindam. So make it your own text. This will be a great lesson. So he addresses his students, those who are listening to him, all of us. So you, he says, you who are devoted to the teacher, to the Guru, to the feet of the Guru, samsar art atirat avamukta. Mukta means to be free. May you soon be free from samsara. And my comment on this samsara atirat avamukta, I think it's always important to understand in the Hindu tradition samsara is not the world. If we speak of freedom from samsara, then basically sometimes we convey the impression that the entire goal of the Hindu tradition is escape from this world. Because we speak of samsara, we equate the world with samsara. Therefore, I'm saying that samsara is avidya. Samsara is a state of mind. Samsara is a way of looking at life. So there is a samsara way of looking at life. There is a mukta state of looking at life. Both are here. Both are here in this world. The aim of the Hindu tradition is not, liberation is not freedom from this world. Liberation is freedom in this world. This is a very important difference. Liberation is jivan mukta. Jivan mukti. Here and now. So samsara is looking at life through the lens of avidya. Moksha is looking at life through the lens of jnana. Both are here. Here and now, in this world itself. In other words, why would God create this world simply for us to escape it? Because there is a fullness of life that is possible here in this world. So the second line, samsara achira bhava mukta. You look carefully, you always see that even here itself, one has to become free and live. When we think of moksha or mukta in this, there are always two dimensions that we must keep in mind. What does liberation free us from? Which is from avidya. But equally important, what does liberation free us from? For means, how does it make life in this world more fulfilling? What is the social dimension of liberation? Is social relevance of moksha. What does it free us for? So you can say, now I am free from this, so what happens now? What am I free for? I am free for being a more generous person. I am free for being a more compassionate person. I am free for being a more caring person. I am free for being a person of peace. So that dimension is very important. It's not simply the negative freedom from, but freedom for. Moksha is also opportunity for a new way of being, a new way of life here, in this reality. So samsara achira bhava mukta. Sendriya manasa niyama devam. And it comes back again, the very last verse, to remind us of the necessity of a life of control, of life of practice. Make sure you don't. Again, it's almost like that Gita reminder in Sita Prajna Lakshana, that section where Krishna says that even for the wise person, Arati Prasabam Manaha. But he says that even the wise person can be swept away. So, Arati Prasabam Manaha. That one has to always be vigilant. Vigilance. So he reminds us about vigilance of control, even for the wise persons. Sendriya manas and devam. There is no one who should not be vigilant about practicing self-control. There's no excuse for inattentiveness to that. Drakshasi nija hridayastam. Very beautiful last line. And may you discover God in your own heart. Drakshasi, nija hridaya, in your own heart, nija hridayastam. May you discover the Lord who dwells in you, of course, in everyone. Shankara gives us this verse of blessing, this verse of benediction, as he continues Bhaja Govindam. So I hope, it's my hope also, that this text will enrich all of us who study it together. I was taught this text we speak of the Hindu tradition as Sampradaya. Sampradaya means a flow. So those of us who have the blessing of receiving, we participate in the flow by giving. So that's how the Sampradaya is maintained. And this is a very beautiful word, Sampradaya. If you belong to a Sampradaya, you have responsibilities. The responsibility of receiving is giving. That's how it's maintained. So I remember when I first studied this Bhaja Govindam with my own teacher, Swami Chinmay, and then taught us Bhaja Govindam first time. So I have obligation to share it with you. Right? But you cannot share unless you have people who are interested. Also, you can have satsang by yourself. It's possible. I don't think that is what the acharyas meant when he spoke about Neyam Sajjana Sangechitam, taking them. I think meant the company of good people like all of you. So you meet for study and you meet with Prasanna and Shasha. Sustain this Sampradaya. Sampradaya means all of us to be quite sustenance of its flourishing. So let us conclude with